Forgotten melodies. The Ashford estate stretched across 3 pristine acres of woodside hills, a modernist marvel of glass and steel that had graced the covers of architectural magazines worldwide. But within its walls, the silence was deafening.
I
Don't care what it costs. Find someone who can actually help them, said Ethan Ashford, pinching the bridge of his nose as he paced the length of his home office. At 42, the founder of Nexus Technologies still maintained the sharp jawline and athletic build that had once earned him a spot on Forbes' most eligible tech bachelors list. Now, 18 months after losing his wife Josephine to a rare autoimmune disease, those features had hardened into something closer to granite. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. Sir, we've already been through 11 childcare professionals in the past year. The agencies are ... hesitant. Then, look beyond agencies, Ethan snapped, glancing at the glass wall that separated his office from the main living area. Through it, he could see his children, year-old Thomas and 5-year-old Charlotte, sitting motionless on opposite ends of a sofa designed for comfort but serving more as an island of isolation. Television played an animated film, but neither child seemed to be watching. They simply existed like furniture. There was one possibility, his assistant ventured. A woman named Olivia Winters. She's not with any service, but Dr. Patel from the foundation mentioned her. She has an unusual background, music therapy and child psychology. She's taken a step back from clinical practice, but when can she start? Ethan interrupted. That's just it, sir. She's very selective about placements. She wants to meet you first. All of you. Ethan's jaw tightened. The quarterly earnings call was in 3 days, and the board was growing impatient with his distracted leadership. The last thing he needed was to audition for someone who might not even take the job. Fine, tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. When Olivia Winters arrived at the Ashford estate the next day, she was nothing like Ethan had expected. No clipboard, no resume folder, no professionally conservative outfit. Instead, she wore faded jeans, a simple blue cardigan, and carried only a worn leather messenger bag. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a loose braid, revealing striking green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Ashford," she said with a gentle but firm handshake, "thank you for meeting with me." "Ms. Winters," Ethan replied curtly. Time is limited, so if we could discuss your qualifications and availability, actually," she interrupted with a small smile. "I'd prefer to meet Thomas and Charlotte first, if that's all right." Ethan blinked. Most candidates had been eager to establish their credentials with him before meeting the children. "They're in the living room. I should warn you. They don't speak much. Not since I understand," Olivia said softly. "Loss changes the language we use. Sometimes words feel too small." Something in her tone made Ethan pause. There was no pity there, no clinical detachment, just a quiet understanding that caught him off guard. In the living room, Thomas was building an elaborate structure with magnetic tiles, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked with mechanical precision. Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor, a sketchbook open before her, though she wasn't drawing. Their nanny, a hurried-looking woman in her 50s, stood nearby. Checking her watch repeatedly, Olivia set her bag down by the entrance and simply walked to an empty spot on the floor, settling there without announcement. She didn't speak to the children immediately. Instead, she pulled out a small wooden kalimba from her bag and began to play a simple, melodic tune. The notes hung in the air like raindrops. Thomas's hand slowed on his building project. Charlotte's gaze lifted slightly from her empty page. After a minute of gentle music, Olivia spoke, her voice as melodic as the instrument. "I'm Olivia. I make music sometimes when words are too big or too small. Is it okay if I sit here for a bit?" Neither child answered verbally. But Charlotte shifted slightly in her direction, the first voluntary movement Ethan had seen from her in days. Olivia continued playing for a few minutes, then set the instrument down within Charlotte's reach. This is called a kalimba. The little metal pieces are like piano keys, but for your thumbs. She demonstrated once more, then simply sat back, making no demand for interaction. To Ethan's astonishment, Charlotte's small hand reached out after a moment, one finger tentatively plucking a metal tine. The soft ping seemed to please her, and she did it again. Thomas, meanwhile, had stopped his building entirely and was watching Olivia with guarded curiosity. "That's an inefficient design," he said suddenly, nodding toward the kalimba. It was the first complete sentence Ethan had heard from his son in weeks. Olivia tilted her head. "How would you improve it?" Thomas hesitated, then moved closer, pointing to the arrangement of the metal pieces. "If you organized them differently, you could play more complex patterns without having to move your thumbs so much." "That's a fascinating observation," Olivia replied, genuine interest in her voice. "Would you show me what you mean?" As Thomas began to explain his idea, Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. He'd hired specialists with advanced degrees and glowing references who hadn't elicited more than one-word responses from either child. The nanny looked equally shocked, her eyes darting between the children and Olivia as if witnessing some form of sorcery. After 30 minutes that felt both fleeting and suspended in time, Olivia gently packed away the kalimba. "I should probably talk to your dad now," she said to the children. "Is it okay if I come back another time?" Charlotte, who had eventually moved to sit closer to Olivia, looked up with wide eyes. "Tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Ethan felt something catch in his throat. His daughter, who had communicated primarily through nods and headshakes for months, had just asked a question. In his office, Ethan struggled to maintain his usual businesslike demeanor. "Your approach is ... unconventional." Olivia smiled. Children experiencing trauma often retreat from conventional approaches. Music bypasses the analytical brain and speaks directly to the emotional centers. "It's not magic, Mr. Ashford. It's neuroscience." "And what exactly are your terms?" Ethan asked, falling back on the comfortable territory of negotiation. "I have several," Olivia replied, surprising him with her directness. "I'll work with Thomas and Charlotte 3 days a week, 4 hours each day to start. Require complete autonomy in my sessions with them. It's no surveillance, no interruptions." And she paused, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'll need your participation as well." Ethan frowned. "I'm afraid my schedule doesn't allow for 1 hour once a week," Olivia said firmly. "That's non-negotiable. These children haven't lost just one parent, Mr. Ashford. In many ways, they've lost both." The words struck like a physical blow. Ethan opened his mouth to object, to explain about the pressures of running a global technology company, about the thousands of employees who depended on him, about the impossibility of scaling back now when Nexus was on the verge of their biggest product launch. But the image of Charlotte asking tomorrow stopped him. "Your compensation requirements?" he asked instead. "Standard rate for specialized therapy? But I should be clear, I'm not here as a traditional therapist or nanny. Think of me more as a bridge. My goal is to help this family find its way back to each other. When you no longer need that bridge, my work is done." Ethan studied her. For a long moment, everything about Olivia Winters defied his expectations. From her casual appearance, to her unconventional methods, to her clear boundary setting. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or intimidated by his status. Most unsettling of all, she had managed to reach his children in 30 minutes when an army of experts had failed for months. "When can you start?" he asked finally. "I already have," Olivia replied with a gentle smile. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Ashford, all of you." After she left, Ethan stood at his office window, watching her modest sedan drive away from the estate. For the first time in 18 months, the silence in the house felt a little less absolute, as if the simple notes from Olivia's kalimba had somehow lingered in the air, creating the possibility of a melody where before there had been only emptiness. Resonant strings by the 3rd week of Olivia's visits, subtle changes had begun to transform the Ashford estate. The most noticeable was sound where silence had reigned. There now existed tentative melodies, soft conversations, and occasionally, startlingly, laughter. Ethan first noticed it when passing the sunroom, which Olivia had converted into what she called their sound garden. Inside, Charlotte sat cross-legged before a small xylophone, her dark curls so like her mother's falling forward as she concentrated on striking each bar with careful precision. Beside her, Thomas was arranging a series of glass bottles filled with varying levels of water, tapping each with a metal spoon and adjusting the water levels to fine-tune the pitch. "It's about physics," Thomas explained earnestly when he spotted his father in the doorway. "Ms. Winters says music is just math. We can hear." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching his son's methodical adjustments. "Is that right? Pythagoras figured it out thousands of years ago?" Thomas continued, his eyes bright with intellectual engagement for the first time in months. "The mathematical ratios between notes create harmony or dissonance. It's all patterns, Dad." The casual dad nearly knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs. Thomas had reverted to calling him father after Josephine's death, formal, distant, like addressing a stranger who happened to share your house. "That sounds fascinating," Ethan managed, trying to hide how moved he was by this small linguistic shift. From across the room, Olivia observed the interaction with a slight smile but didn't interject. She had an uncanny ability to create space for connections without forcing them. Later that afternoon, during their required 1-hour session, which Ethan had initially resented but now found himself anticipating, Olivia handed him a simple wooden drum. "I don't play instruments," he said reflexively. "Everyone plays instruments," Olivia countered. "Some just haven't discovered which one speaks to them yet." She settled on a cushion across from him, a similar drum between her knees. "This is a gem. In West African traditions, it's used for storytelling as much as music making." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I'm not much of a storyteller either. I've read your company's quarterly reports," Olivia replied with unexpected humor. "You tell very compelling stories about market projections." The comment startled a laugh out of him, his first genuine laugh in what felt like years. "Rhythm is the most primal form of communication," Olivia continued. "Babies recognize their mother's heartbeat before they understand words. When we experience trauma, returning to rhythm can help us find our way back to ourselves." Skeptical but willing, Ethan mimicked her posture and placed his hands on the drum. Olivia demonstrated a simple pattern, and he followed, feeling self-conscious at first, but gradually settling into the repetitive motion. "Tell me about Josephine," Olivia said quietly after they had established a steady rhythm together. Ethan's hands faltered. "That's not why you're here, isn't it?" Olivia's hands continued their steady beat. "Your children are grieving, but they're also mirroring you, Mr. Ashford. They've learned that in this house we don't speak of what hurts us." "Because speaking doesn't change anything," Ethan said, his voice hardening as he resumed drumming, slightly faster now. "It doesn't bring her back," Olivia agreed, "but it might bring you back, and them." The rhythm between them shifted, becoming more complex as Ethan unconsciously increased the tempo, channeling his frustration into the drum. "She loved spring," he said suddenly, the words emerging as if pulled from him by the insistent rhythm. "Cherry blossoms. She made us picnic under them every April, even when I had meetings. Said life was too short to miss the blooms." Olivia didn't respond verbally, but her drumming softened, creating space for his words. She was right. His hands slowed. Life was too short. For the remainder of the hour, between stretches of rhythmic drumming, fragments of Josephine emerged, her laugh, her stubbornness, her passion for environmental causes that had led to the foundation now run in her name. Ethan spoke of their courtship during his startup days, of her unwavering belief in his vision, even when investors balked, of her insistence that their children grow up understanding the value of work beyond wealth. When their session ended, Ethan felt strangely lighter, as if the drum had absorbed some of the weight he'd been carrying. "Same time next week?" Olivia asked, gathering her things. Ethan nodded, then hesitated. "The children have been asking to visit the cherry grove at the botanical garden." It was a tradition. ... "Before, would you consider accompanying us this Sunday?" "Professionally, of course," he added hastily. Something flickered in Olivia's green eyes, surprise, perhaps, or consideration. "I think that would be beneficial for them," she said after a moment. "For all of you, that Sunday, under a canopy of pink blossoms." Charlotte placed a small hand in Ethan's as they walked the winding path. Thomas ran ahead, then back, pointing out interesting insects and plant formations. Olivia walked slightly apart. giving the family space while remaining a reassuring presence. When Charlotte spotted a fallen blossom and whispered, "Mommy would like this one," Ethan didn't flinch or change the subject as he might have weeks earlier. Instead, he knelt beside his daughter and helped her collect a small bouquet of fallen petals. "She would love that you remembered," he said softly, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. From several paces away, Olivia watched the interaction, her expression thoughtful. For a moment, something like sorrow passed across her features, quickly replaced by professional composure when Thomas bounded over to show her a particularly fascinating beetle, unknown to the Ashfords. This outing marked a turning point for Olivia as well, a blurring of boundaries she had maintained carefully since leaving her clinical practice. The family's grief, so similar yet distinct from her own, was beginning to resonate with strings she had long ago silenced within herself. Harmonic dissonance by early summer. The Ashford children had undergone a transformation that bordered on miraculous to those who had known them in the dark months after their mother's death. Thomas had rejoined his robotics club, bringing home elaborate contraptions that now included musical components. Charlotte had begun singing again softly at first, then with growing confidence, often making up little melodies about her day. But perhaps the most profound change was in Ethan himself. The man who once scheduled 15-minute blocks to check in with his children now lingered over breakfast, helping Charlotte perfect her French toast technique and discussing Thomas's latest engineering concepts. He had even begun leaving the office by 6 3 nights a week, an unprecedented development that had his executive team exchanging concerned glances. "Your attention seems divided lately," remarked Victor Hammond, Ethan's CFO and oldest friend, during their weekly strategy meeting. "The Singapore team mentioned you left the conference call early yesterday." "It was Charlotte's dance recital," Ethan replied, not looking up from the quarterly projections on his tablet. "She's playing a daffodil. Apparently it's a crucial role." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Josephine would be pleased." Ethan's fingers stilled on the screen. "Yes," he said quietly. "She would." After a moment, Victor cleared his throat. "The board is concerned about the London expansion. Hartwell Microsystems is pushing for an answer on the acquisition." "The acquisition can wait," Ethan said with uncharacteristic firmness. "We're not uprooting the company or my family for Hartwell's timetable. 6 months ago, you were ready to move mountains to make this deal happen," Victor observed. Ethan finally looked up, his expression contemplative. "6 months ago, I thought success meant something different than I do now." Wow. The shift in Ethan's priorities did not go unnoticed by Olivia. During their weekly session, which had evolved from drumming to walking the grounds of the estate, she brought it up directly. "You've canceled 3 consecutive board calls for family activities," she noted as they followed a path through the property's small orchard. "That's significant progress in work-life balance. Or professional negligence, depending who you ask." Ethan replied with a wry smile. "Victor thinks I'm having a midlife crisis. And what do you think?" Olivia asked. Ethan considered this as they walked beneath apple trees, heavy with unripe fruit. "I'm finally understanding what Josephine meant when she said no. Company valuation could compensate for missing Thomas's first words or Charlotte's first steps." He paused. "I built Nexus so my family would have security, but somewhere along the way, I confused building a company with building a life." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "The children are flourishing with your increased presence. You've done remarkable work these past months." "We've done remarkable work," Ethan corrected her. "I wouldn't have known where to begin without your guidance." They reached a stone bench overlooking the valley beyond the property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully manicured lawn, and in the distance, the San Francisco skyline shimmered like a mirage. "Which brings me to a difficult conversation," Olivia said as they sat. "I think it's time we discuss transitioning to less frequent sessions." Ethan turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "The children adore you. Charlotte was just saying yesterday that she wants to learn that new string instrument you mentioned." "The guzheng," Olivia supplied with a small smile, "and I can certainly recommend an excellent teacher. But my role was always meant to be temporary, a bridge, remember? You and the children have built solid connections now." You're communicating, processing grief together, creating new traditions while honoring Josephine's memory. You make it sound so simple, Ethan said, a note of apprehension in his voice. It's not simple at all, Olivia acknowledged. It's incredibly complex and ongoing. But you don't need me to mediate those connections anymore. A frown creased Ethan's brow. Is this because of last week, when I asked about your background? I didn't mean to pry. Olivia looked away, focusing on the distant horizon. Question. He referred to it seemed innocent enough, a natural inquiry about what had led her from clinical practice to her current work. But it had touched on wounds still raw enough to make her retreat into professional distance. This isn't about that, she said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. It's about maintaining appropriate boundaries and ensuring your family develops resilience that isn't dependent on my presence. Appropriate boundaries? Ethan repeated slowly. It's like not noticing how you always wear the same silver pendant. Or not wondering why someone with your talents chose to work with just one family instead of maintaining a full practice. Or pretending I don't see the grief you carry when you think no one's looking. Olivia's hand went instinctively to the small silver pendant at her throat, a simple treble clef that she touched like a talisman in moments of stress. You're very observant for someone who used to schedule time to look at his children, she said, attempting lightness, but achieving only brittleness. I'm learning to pay attention to what matters, Ethan replied softly. You taught me that. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken complications. Olivia stood abruptly. I should check on Thomas and Charlotte, we were working on a composition project before our walk. Ethan remained seated, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Olivia, he said, using her first name with deliberate intimacy. Whatever you're running from, whatever harmony you're afraid of disrupting, hope someday you'll trust me enough to share it. She met his gaze for one unguarded moment, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps of parallel journeys through loss toward an uncertain redemption. Some symphonies aren't meant to be played, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, composing herself, she added more professionally, we should discuss a transition plan for the children, perhaps reducing to 2 days a week. Initially, then 1. Ethan nodded, accepting her retreat for now. As you think best. You're the expert, after all. Not on everything, Olivia murmured, and turned to walk back toward the house, leaving Ethan on the bench with thoughts as complex and layered as any symphony. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Ethan found himself in his home. Office not working as he normally would be, but instead searching online for information about Olivia Winters. He had respected her privacy until now. But her reaction to his question and her sudden push for transition had awakened both concern and curiosity. The search yielded modest results at first, references to her work at a prestigious children's hospital, a few academic articles on music therapy for traumatized children, a photograph from a conference where she had presented on innovative approaches to grief counseling, and then, buried in a local newspaper's digital archives from 3 years earlier, found it. A profile piece on the hospital's groundbreaking therapy program featuring Dr. Olivia Winters and her husband, composer and concert pianist Julian Reed. The accompanying photograph showed them sitting at a grand piano, Julian's hands poised over the keys while Olivia looked at him with unmistakable adoration, her hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. Ethan sat back, a cold realization washing over him. There had been no mention of a husband in her limited personal revelations, no child ever referenced. And the publication date of the article, almost exactly 3 years ago, lined with the gap in her professional history. Whatever symphony had been silenced in Olivia's life, it had been catastrophic enough to transform a rising clinical star into a solitary healer. Using her gifts selectively while keeping the world at a careful distance, Ethan closed the browser, a heaviness settling in his chest. He would not mention his discovery, but he understood now why Olivia recognized their family's pain so acutely, why she could navigate the treacherous waters of grief with such intuitive skill. She wasn't just the bridge she had described in their first meeting. She was a fellow traveler on the same stormy sea. Crescendo of hope, the transition plan Olivia had proposed was proceeding methodically. 3 days a week became 2. with the children showing only minimal anxiety at the reduction. Thomas had developed a fascination with sound engineering, channeling his natural technical abilities into recording and manipulating the soundscape of the estate, as he called it. Charlotte had joined a children's choir and was thriving under the structured musical education. Ethan, meanwhile, had reached an unexpected crossroads at Nexus. The London expansion that Victor and the board had been pushing for months had evolved into an ultimatum: relocate to oversee the European headquarters personally, or step back to a less operational role. "They're testing me," Ethan told Olivia during one of their now weekly walks, which continued despite the official reduction in her schedule. "Seeing if my priorities shift is temporary or permanent. And what have you decided?" Olivia asked. Careful to maintain her professional tone despite the increasingly personal nature of their conversations, Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I've decided to call their bluff. I'm restructuring the executive team. Victor will head the London office while I remain CEO here." "That's a significant organizational change," Olivia observed. "It's overdue," Ethan replied. "Even before Josephine's illness, I was spreading myself too thin. The company needs focused leadership in both markets, not one exhausted founder trying to be everywhere at once." Olivia studied him, noting the clarity in his expression, the absence of the conflicted tension that had characterized him in earlier months. "You seem at peace with the decision." "I am," he confirmed. "For the first time in years, perhaps? Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you." He hesitated, then continued carefully. "The Children's Foundation that Josephine established focuses on arts education for underserved communities. The board has been searching for a new program director, someone who understands both the therapeutic and educational aspects of arts intervention." Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. "Ethan, it's not charity," he said quickly. "Your background is exactly what the position requires. The work you've done with Thomas and Charlotte demonstrates your capabilities beyond any interview process we could design. It would allow you to expand your impact while maintaining connections you've already established." "You researched me," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Ethan had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Only professionally." "Your credentials are impressive, Dr. Winters." The formal title hung between them, acknowledging what had remained largely unspoken during their months of acquaintance. Olivia's hand went to her pendant, a gesture Ethan now recognized as self-protective. "I stepped away from that world for good reasons," she said finally. "I know," Ethan replied softly. "Or at least, I suspect. But hiding your gifts doesn't honor what you've lost, Olivia. It only compounds the tragedy." Her head snapped up, eyes flashing with rare anger. "You don't get to determine how I honor my losses, Mr. Ashford. Not everything broken can be fixed with a well-funded foundation or a new corporate structure." "I know that better than most," Ethan countered, refusing to retreat. "But I also know that what you've given my family, what you've given me, a path forward that honors Josephine rather than entombing her memory in silence. Can you honestly say you've allowed yourself the same grace?" Olivia turned away, her composure threatening to crack for the first time since he'd known her. "This conversation has crossed professional boundaries. You crossed those boundaries months ago," Ethan said gently. "Every time you stayed for dinner, after your sessions, every time you laughed with the children outside the structured therapy time, and every time you and I discussed books or music or philosophy during these walks that have nothing to do with my parenting skills. I should have maintained better boundaries," Olivia murmured, more to herself than to him. "Or perhaps we both needed the connection more than we needed the boundaries," Ethan suggested. A charged silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of Thomas's newest recording project, the natural symphony of the estate's garden. Birds and insects and the rustle of leaves captured through sensitive microphones he had positioned throughout the grounds. "I should go," Olivia said finally. "The children are at their music lessons until 5. We can discuss the transition schedule tomorrow." "Olivia," Ethan said, making no move to stop her physically, but his voice compelling her to pause. "Whatever happened 3 years ago, to your husband, to your baby, it doesn't define you. Just as Josephine's death doesn't define me or my children, it's part of our story, but not the whole composition." She stood perfectly still, her back to him, the afternoon sunlight catching the auburn highlights in her hair. For a moment, Ethan thought she might simply walk away. Instead, she spoke so quietly he had to strain to hear. His name was Julian. He was a brilliant pianist. We met at Juilliard when I was studying music therapy, and he was in the performance program. Her voice strengthened slightly as she continued. Our daughter, we were going to name her Melody, was stillborn at 7 months. Julian was driving to the hospital to meet me when another driver ran a red light. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The dual tragedy, even more devastating than he had imagined. I lost them both within 6 hours, Olivia continued, her voice distant, as if reciting facts about strangers. Everyone told me how strong I was at the funeral, how admirably I was holding up. So I kept holding up because falling apart seemed like betraying their perception of me. I finished my doctorate. I published research. I smiled at colleagues who didn't know what to say. She turned back to face him, her eyes dry but haunted. And then one day I walked out of the hospital in the middle of a session with a 7-year-old cancer patient who just wanted me to help him record a song for his mother in case he didn't make it through. His next treatment? I couldn't do it. I couldn't face another loss, another fragile human connection. So you protected yourself by limiting your exposure, Ethan said with understanding. Working with families temporarily, keeping professional distance, being the bridge, but never crossing over yourself. Olivia nodded. Until your family. Until you. The admission seemed to cost her something vital. I should have recognized the warning signs. Should have maintained better boundaries. Or maybe Ethan said carefully, taking a single step toward her. Maybe this is what healing actually looks like for both of us. Not forgetting, not moving on, but expanding. Making room for new joy alongside the sorrow. It's not that simple, Olivia whispered. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Ethan agreed. The foundation position is yours if you want it. No pressure, no expectations beyond your professional contributions. But know that whatever you decide, Thomas and Charlotte will always consider you part of their story. As will I. He held her gaze for a long moment, then deliberately changed the subject, giving her space to process. Thomas wants to play his latest soundscape composition for us at dinner. Would you like to join us? Purely as a musical consultant, of course. A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips at his attempt to lighten the moment. I'd like that, she said simply. That evening, as Thomas proudly presented his audio creation, a surprisingly sophisticated layering of natural sounds that captured the essence of the estate. In summer, Ethan watched Olivia across the dinner table. She was focused entirely on Thomas's explanation of his technical process, asking insightful questions and offering genuine praise that made his son practically glow with pride. Charlotte, seated beside Olivia, leaned against her with the casual physical affection of a child who feels completely secure. It was a tableau of connection that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Ethan found Olivia in the music room, her fingers tracing the keys of the grand piano that had remained closed since Josephine's death. She played, Olivia asked without turning. Beautifully, Ethan confirmed, stepping into the room, though she claimed she was perpetually out of practice. Ow. It was her grandmother's piano. Olivia nodded, her hands still resting on the polished lid. Music heirlooms carry stories. Thomas might take lessons someday if he moves beyond his electronic compositions. He'd need a teacher, Ethan said carefully. Olivia turned to face him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. I've been thinking about your foundation offer, not as an escape from my past, but as a way to honor it. Julian believed music could heal almost anything. So did I once, and now, Ethan asked. Now I think healing isn't about returning to what was before. It's about creating something new from what remains. She took a deep breath. I'd like to discuss the position further. Professionally, of course. Ethan agreed, though. They both recognized the qualifier for the gentle fiction it was. We can set up a meeting with the foundation board next week. Olivia nodded. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, she reached out and briefly touched his hand. Thank you, Ethan. Not for the offer, but for seeing me. The real me, behind the professional facade. "Thank you for seeing us," Ethan replied, turning his hand to briefly clasp hers. "All of us, even when we couldn't see each other." In that quiet moment, with the silent piano bearing witness, something shifted between them, not a dramatic declaration or a clear resolution, but a mutual acknowledgement of possibility. It's like the first notes of a composition yet to be fully written, tentative but promising. The final movement 1 year later, the Ashford estate hosted its first annual summer concert to benefit the Josephine Ashford Foundation for Arts Education. The expansive lawn had been transformed with a temporary stage, rows of elegant seating, and twinkling lights strung through the trees. 300 guests mingled in the golden late afternoon light, including families served by the Foundation's programs, Nexus executives, and members of the local arts community. Backstage, in what was normally Ethan's home office, Olivia adjusted Charlotte's flower crown while Thomas paced nervously, clutching his custom-designed sound mixer. What if the speakers fail? He fretted, running through his mental checklist for the 20th time. What if the wireless microphones interfere with thee? Then we'll adapt, Olivia assured him calmly. Music existed long before electricity, remember? We always have options. Dead. Thomas had grown taller and more confident over the past year, though his technical mind still sought certainty in a world full of variables. Charlotte, now 7, had blossomed into a poised young performer. Her natural musicality, refined through consistent lessons, and the children's choir that Olivia had helped establish at the foundation. Is Dad nervous too? What? Charlotte asked, peering out the window at the gathering crowd. Your father doesn't get nervous, Thomas scoffed. He negotiates billion-dollar deals all the time. Actually, came Ethan's voice from the doorway, I'm terrified. He entered the room looking simultaneously familiar and transformed in his formal attire, a subtle smile playing at his lips. But sometimes the most important performances require a bit of stage fright. Olivia looked up, their gazes connecting with the easy intimacy that had developed between them. Her role as program director for the foundation had indeed maintained professional boundaries during office hours. Beyond that, their relationship had evolved gradually and deliberately, with the children's well-being always at the center of their consideration. You'll all be magnificent, she assured them, including Ethan in her encouraging smile. This concert represents everything Josephine valued: community, creativity, opportunity for children regardless of circumstance. Charlotte nodded solemnly. Mom would love the butterfly release at the end, especially since the monarchs are endangered. She absolutely would, Ethan agreed, kneeling to his daughter's level. She'd be so proud of both of you. The production assistant appeared at the door. 5 minutes to places everyone. The family concert featuring performances from foundation students, professional musicians who had donated their talents, and the debut of Thomas and Charlotte's multimedia piece proceeded flawlessly, despite Thomas's technical concerns. The audience responded with genuine enthusiasm rather than mere polite appreciation, particularly for the children's composition, which combined Charlotte's pure soprano with Thomas's layered soundscape of natural and electronic elements. When Ethan took the stage for his brief remarks about the foundation's work, he spoke with an authentic passion that had been absent from his corporate presentations of years past. My late wife Josephine believed that art wasn't a luxury but a necessity, he told the rapt audience. She understood that music in particular could bridge divides of language, culture, and circumstance. In the darkest days following her passing, our family discovered the truth of her conviction through the transformative power of musical connection. His gaze found Olivia, standing discreetly at the side of the stage, and though he didn't gesture toward her or mention her by name, the acknowledgement was clear to those who knew their story. The programs you've supported tonight provide not just musical education, but healing, community, and possibility for children facing challenges from illness to economic hardship to personal loss. Every child deserves the chance to find their voice, whether through words, notes, or the unique symphony of their own creation. As twilight descended, the final performance featured all the student participants joining professional musicians for a collaborative piece that had been composed specifically for the event. Near the conclusion, butterflies were released from decorative containers, their orange wings catching the last rays of sunlight as they spiraled upward into the deepening blue sky. Charlotte, watching from beside Olivia, slipped her small hand into the woman's larger one. "It's like they're carrying our music to heaven," she whispered. "Do you think Mom can hear it?" Olivia knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. "I believe music transcends all boundaries," she said softly, "including the one between here and wherever your mom is now." Thomas, overhearing, nodded with the serious consideration he gave all metaphysical questions. "Sound waves disperse but never truly disappear," he contributed. "They just transform." After the concert, when the last guests had departed and the children had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Ethan and Olivia stood on the terrace overlooking the grounds where staff were quietly dismantling the stage. "Successful by any metric," Ethan said, loosening his tie with a relieved sigh. "The foundation board is already talking about making it an annual signature event." "The children were extraordinary," Olivia agreed. "Charlotte's confidence has grown tremendously, and Thomas actually smiled during his performance. Instead of concentrating so hard he looks pained." Ethan laughed softly. "Comes by that honestly. I've been told I have the same expression during board meetings." "Head," Olivia corrected gently, past tense. "You've changed to Ethan." He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "We all have. That's what this year has been about, hasn't it? Not returning to who we were before loss, but becoming new. Versions of ourselves that honor what came before while embracing what's possible now."
Out.
Olivia nodded, her hand going to the silver treble clef pendant she still wore daily. No longer as a talisman of grief, but as a connection to her past. Didn't prevent her from moving forward. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued, his tone shifting to something more careful, more weighted with significance, "about the Foundation's expansion plans for next year. The board is considering satellite programs in 3 additional cities." "I've seen the proposal," Olivia confirmed. "It's ambitious, but achievable with the right staffing." "It would involve some travel," Ethan noted. The program director, at least initially. A small frown creased Olivia's brow. "Are you concerned?" "About my availability? I've been careful to structure my schedule around the children's needs." "That's not," Ethan began, then paused, regrouping. "I'm not expressing this well. What I'm trying to say is that the children have become very attached to you, as have I." Olivia's expression softened. "And I to all of you." "The thing is," Ethan continued, uncharacteristically hesitant, "when we talk about the future Nautilus' robotics competitions next year, Charlotte's interest in that Swiss music camp, the Foundation's expansion, I find myself assuming you'll be part of all of it. With us. Not just professionally, but ... He gestured vaguely between them. "Personally," Olivia supplied, her voice quiet but steady. "Yes." Ethan met her gaze directly. "I know we've been careful, deliberate, for the children's sake and for our own healing. But I find myself wondering if we're being too cautious now, holding back from possibilities out of fear rather than wisdom." Olivia was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the garden, where butterflies still occasionally flitted between flowers in the gathering darkness. Julian used to say that the most powerful moments in music are often not the notes themselves, but the silences between them, the anticipation, the breath, the pause that makes what follows more meaningful, she said finally. "I think perhaps our caution has been like that. It's not an absence but a preparation." Ethan moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. "And what comes after the preparatory silence? In musical terms?" A smile touched Olivia's lips. "Of resolution. Harmony. Sometimes, if the composer is particularly skilled, transcendence." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar over months of careful connection. "I'm not asking for certainties or promises beyond what feels right to you. I'm just suggesting that perhaps we could be a little less careful, a little more open to wherever this composition is leading us." Olivia looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the soft lights from the garden. In them, Ethan could see not just the present moment, but echoes of all that had brought them here, loss and healing. professional boundaries, and personal connection. Separate journeys that had somehow converged into a shared path forward. "I think," she said softly, "that sounds like a beautiful next movement." In the quiet of the terrace, with the estate settling around them, and two sleeping children whose hearts were healing upstairs, Ethan and Olivia stood together, not as a replacement for what either had lost, but as something new and unexpected that honored all that had come before, like a symphony incorporating themes from earlier movements into something fresh and resonant. Their story continued to unfold, note by note, silence by silence, into harmonies yet to be discovered, and somewhere, perhaps Josephine and Julian, and a little girl who would have been named Melody, listened to the music of new beginnings with benevolent understanding. As the butterflies carried the last notes of the day's concert into the infinite star-filled sky,